Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the state of mobile internet connectivity. My name is Callum. I'm the Senior Insights Manager for the Connected Society Programme, and you'll also be joined by Calvin shortly, who is our Principal Economist at GSMA. Just to flag that both of us will be presenting today. We only have, unfortunately, have one microphone, so do please bear with us as we pass it back and forth during the course of the presentation. In this webinar, we're going to present the key findings from this year's State of Mobile Internet Connectivity Report, along with a short demonstration of the latest Mobile Connectivity Index. We'll also leave some time at the end for any questions that you may have, so please add your questions into the chat box as we go, and we'll pick them up at the end. First though, I'd like to highlight why driving mobile internet connectivity is such an important priority. The internet is driving economic growth and societal development, enabling access to life-enhancing services and creating multiple opportunities for citizens and businesses to thrive. At the GSMA, our Mobile for Development Foundation works with operators and others in the mobile industry to enable the development, pilot, and scaling of life-saving and life-changing mobile-delivered products and services. This ranges from mobile-delivered agricultural nutrition information through to exploring the potential of digital identity and identifying how to ensure equity in digital skills and ownership. We recently published our 10 Years of Mobile for Development page on our website. The link is on the screen there, and I'd recommend that you all check it out. I'd also like to briefly mention a little bit more about our programme, the Connected Society Programme. This was established by the GSMA with support from donor and industry partners to increase access to and adoption of the mobile internet. Our focus is on underserved population groups in emerging markets. As highlighted on the slide, our work can be divided into three areas: insights, support to mobile operators and their partners, and advocacy efforts. More specifically, our work focuses on 5 barriers to mobile internet adoption, listed here. We'll also touch upon several of these during the course of the webinar today. In particular, mobile internet needs to be accessible to citizens. There are often challenges in accessing network coverage, handsets, electricity, and mobile agents, as well as identity documents required to open mobile accounts in the first place. The internet also needs to be affordable. Connectivity and device costs can be a significant barrier to adoption and are often cited as the greatest barrier to mobile ownership and internet access in research that we've conducted in many countries around the world. The internet also needs to be usable, particularly for those who have lower levels of digital literacy and confidence. Lack of awareness of the internet and how it is relevant to lives and livelihoods can be a particular barrier. Lower levels of skills and confidence can also limit uptake, which can also result in only a limited number of applications and services being used. We also note that the internet also needs to be safe and secure. It's important to address the safety, security, and harassment concerns that inhibit citizens from benefiting from, or even wanting to, access and use the internet. And finally, the internet needs to be relevant. Products and services need to be developed based on an understanding of local needs, circumstances, preferences, and realities. Beyond this work, we also collaborate with many other GSMA teams. I'll now hand across to Calvin, who will take you through some of the main findings from the State of Mobile Internet Connectivity Report, and then I'll come back to you later with some of the findings and conclusions from that report.
Great. Thank you everyone for taking the time to participate in this webinar. So I'm going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes discussing the background and the findings of the State of Mobile Internet Connectivity report from this year, and some of the insights we found. So the State of Mobile Internet Connectivity is now an annual report produced by the GSMA Connected Society team and GSMA Intelligence. It provides an overview of the state of mobile internet connectivity at a global, regional, and also country level. It's particularly focused on lower and middle income countries because this is where around 90% of the world's unconnected population live. The report identifies the key barriers that are stopping the spread of mobile internet adoption, especially to underserved populations such as women and rural communities. It also identifies countries or regions that have made strong progress and provides evidence-based suggestions to accelerate mobile internet access. So the presentation that I'll give consists of 5 parts. We'll start with a brief overview of the methodology and data used in the report. We'll then go through some findings on coverage, connectivity, as well as barriers and usage. Callum will then take you through some of the considerations and recommendations on accelerating digital inclusion. And then lastly, I'll provide a short demonstration of how you can use the Mobile Connectivity Index. So if we turn to the State of Mobile Internet Connectivity report, the research and the findings here are primarily based on 2 bespoke analytical tools. So the first is the Connectivity Index itself, which measures the performance of 165 countries against the key enablers of mobile internet adoption. The index was developed as part of the mobile industry's commitment to drive mobile internet connectivity and accelerate digital inclusion. The second data source that we use is the GSMA Intelligence Consumer Survey, which in 2018 included 18 lower middle income countries that accounted for around 70% of the developing country adult population. Just some brief overview of the methodology that underpins the Mobile Connectivity Index. So on the website that we'll show you later, there's a detailed methodology document where you can find more information. But at a high level, the index has been constructed according to the guidelines developed by the OECD and the European Commission Joint Research Centre. Here you can see the 10 key steps in constructing an index. We start off with a theoretical framework of understanding what the key enablers need to be in place for a country to achieve high levels of mobile internet adoption. And then based on this framework, we've selected 38 indicators that capture some of those enabling factors. We then carry out a series of statistical analysis to treat the data, and using that data, we then aggregate it and normalize it into an overall index score, which we'll see in the index demonstration later. This provides an overview of the structure of the Mobile Connectivity Index. So it's based on 4 overarching enablers, which are critical for a country's population to adopt mobile internet. So these are infrastructure, affordability, consumer readiness, and the availability of secure online content and services. Those enablers are in turn made up of 14 dimensions, and those dimensions are made up of the 38 indicators that we discussed before. So turning to some of the key findings of this year's mobile internet report. So on this slide, you'll see trends in mobile internet adoption. So since 2014, which is when the Mobile Connectivity Index goes back to in terms of data, mobile internet access has grown year on year. In 2018, a further 300 million people were connected to mobile internet, and that brought the total number of people using mobile internet to over 3.5 billion people globally, which is equivalent to around 47% of the world's population. Those who aren't connected can be split into 2 groups. So we have what we refer to as the uncovered. So these are people who are not covered by a mobile broadband network and so cannot access mobile internet services, even if they had a handset. And then the covered but not connected are those that are covered by a mobile broadband network but aren't using mobile internet. The first group, the people who aren't covered, we refer to as the coverage gap. And if you look at the chart there, the coverage gap has more than halved between 2014 and 2018. So in 2014, around a quarter of the world's population weren't covered by a mobile broadband network, but by 2018, this had fallen to around 10%, which equates to around 750 million people who remain outside of mobile broadband coverage. And we tend to find that a significant proportion of this group, specifically 40%, live in Sub-Saharan Africa, especially those living in rural and remote and sparsely populated areas. If we compare the coverage gap to the usage gap, so the usage gap is the proportion of population that live within a mobile broadband network but aren't using mobile internet, this is over 4 times larger than the coverage gap. So 3.3 billion people are covered but not connected. And this really highlights the importance of factors other than network coverage that are stopping people from using mobile internet, including affordability, literacy, and skills. And this is why these are factors that we also consider in the Mobile Connectivity Index. Moving beyond some of the global numbers, so we also provide breakdowns of connectivity at a regional level, and we can see on this slide that mobile internet connectivity has not been growing equally. More than 2/3 of the population are connected to mobile internet in North America and Europe. By contrast, in South Asia, we see that around 1/3 are connected, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's around 1/4. This means that more than half of the world's population are unable to realize the social and economic benefits that mobile internet can enable. And if current trends continue, although we're likely to see growing mobile internet access based on current trends, by 2025, we'll still have around 40% of the world's population in developing countries being offline, which really highlights the need to accelerate some of these measures if we're to the mobile internet grow at a rate that allows the majority of the population to benefit from the services that they enable. In the report, we do present some connectivity trends by region. You can find each region's statistics in the report. We wanted to highlight one in particular in Sub-Saharan Africa. We mentioned before that the proportion of population in the region using mobile internet is around 1/4. What was particularly interesting this year, though, is the reduction in the coverage gap. So in 2017, around 63% of the population were covered by a mobile broadband network, which is a 3G or 4G network. But in 2018, this increased quite significantly to 70%. What was also quite interesting is that this wasn't just driven by expansion in a small number of large countries. Rather, we saw the expansion in a number of countries across the continent, including Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, and Senegal. The expansion was primarily driven by a program of upgrading 2G sites, particularly by deploying single RAN technology and also using 900 MHz spectrum to roll out 3G in a more cost-effective manner. We also see that over time, as mobile broadband and smartphones become more affordable and people in the continent using them, it provides an additional incentive for operators to expand mobile broadband coverage. With 2G coverage currently standing at 85% in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's expected that operators will continue to upgrade their sites over the next few years, so we should see this improvement in the reduction in the coverage gap continuing in the coming years. However, this is conditional on regulators ensuring that spectrum can be refarmed and that the right amount of spectrum is available. It's also going to remain a challenge to upgrade 2G sites and expand coverage into uncovered areas in rural and remote areas. Given the lack of commercial sustainability in these areas, alternative solutions will be required, and we highlight this in the report and refer to some of the other work that GSMA has done as well. Within markets, there are also strong disparities in mobile internet adoption. In this particular slide, we show by region some of the gaps we see between rural and urban populations. So in 2018, the rural mobile internet gap was 40% in developing countries. This means that those living in rural areas were 40% less likely to use mobile internet than those in urban areas. This represents an improvement to a gap of 46% in 2017, but the size of it is still significant. And we also see that in certain regions, it's particularly prevalent in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. On this slide, we see similar analysis, but applying it to the gender gap. And again, here we see a persistent gender gap in usage. So globally, in low and middle income countries, women are 23% less likely than men to use mobile internet, which is equivalent to around 300 million fewer adult women using mobile internet than men. The mobile internet gender gap also varies significantly by region and also by country. You can see here that we have a much larger gender gap in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, but it's relatively much smaller in East Asia Pacific and Latin America. So that concludes some of the key findings on coverage and connectivity. In the next part, we'll look at some key findings around the barriers to mobile internet adoption and also how those who are connected are using it. So for this analysis, we drew on a lot of the data that we gather in the GSMA Intelligence Consumer Survey, which provides insights on what prevents individuals from using mobile internet. In the countries that are included in our survey, for those that aren't using mobile internet, we asked whether they were aware of mobile internet, and for those that were aware, what was stopping them from using it. In the survey countries, around a fifth or 21% of adults are not aware of mobile internet, and this proportion is higher in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Among those who are aware of mobile internet, we find that a lack of literacy in digital skills was the biggest perceived barrier to adoption in pretty much all regions. A key reason for the dominance of this barrier is that a lot of the remaining unconnected population has low levels of literacy. In addition to a lack of digital skills and literacy, our survey found that affordability and feeling that the internet was not relevant to them and safety and security concerns were also stopping a lot of people from using mobile internet. What was particularly interesting is some of the regional variation we found. So in Africa, affordability was highlighted as a particularly important barrier, which is consistent with some of the data that we'll see in the next couple of slides. In Latin America, security and safety concerns were highlighted as a significant barrier compared to other regions, while relevance and the availability of content was identified as a barrier by fewer consumers in the region. Building on some of the barriers around affordability, so in the Mobile Connectivity Index, we have some indicators looking at the affordability of mobile, which we look at in terms of both the affordability of mobile data and also handsets. In this slide, you can see some data for the last 3 years on the cost of 1 gigabyte as a proportion of monthly income. The black charts present the findings for low and middle income countries overall, and then we also highlight Sub-Saharan Africa in red and South Asia in green. In a positive development is that the cost of purchasing mobile data as a proportion of average incomes has declined over 3 years, though there remains significant variation. And also, while data is becoming more affordable, the cost of 1 gigabyte as a proportion of monthly income still exceeds 2%, which is the target that has been set by the Broadband Commission. In terms of the differences by region, you'll see that in South Asia, the affordability is much better than the overall average, and in 2018 stood at around 1.2% of monthly income, so lower and therefore meeting the Broadband Commission target. This is consistent with the analysis you saw on the previous slide, which showed that consumers in South Asia tend to report affordability as a much less significant barrier than other factors. By contrast, in Sub-Saharan Africa, while the trend has been improving, the cost of 1 gigabyte of data as a proportion of monthly income stands at 6.8%. And within the region, more than 3/4 of countries have affordability levels that are above the 2% target. To close the usage gap and drive digital inclusion, these trends will therefore have to be continued, and it'll also be important to improve affordability amongst the poorest in society. Because while these charts show the average levels of affordability, if you were to look at the poorest 20% within Sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of 1 gigabyte increases to almost 40% of monthly income. On this slide, we show the cost of handsets, in particular entry-level internet-capable devices that might be available to those who want to use mobile internet in low and middle income countries. While the cost of mobile data has been steadily decreasing, as we saw on the previous slide, the cost of an entry-level internet device has remained relatively stable on average during the last 3 years at around 20% of monthly income. As with mobile data, device costs as a proportion of income are highest in Sub-Saharan Africa, and affordability for the poorest 20% is particularly stark. In Sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of a handset can represent almost 400% of monthly income. It's therefore unsurprising that in our survey and in other research, the affordability of devices remains one of the biggest barriers to mobile internet adoption. Going forward, however, we see that there are some new smartphones and feature phones that should be available at lower price points than we've seen in recent years. For example, when considering handset prices in US dollar terms, we find handsets that are available around $45 on average in the lower middle income markets that we collect data for. In South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, it's actually a little bit less at $35 to $40. And this year, we're starting to see new generations and types of feature phones and smartphones that are available at price points closer than $20. So hopefully in the coming years, we might see this reflected in future reports and analysis. On this last slide on some of our key findings in the report, we look at those who are actually using mobile internet to try and understand what they're actually using mobile internet connectivity for. And in this chart, we highlight usage in lower middle income countries and high income countries for a range of different mobile services. So consistent with other research, we find that the use of instant messaging and social networks are the most popular online activities in both developing and developed countries. In developing countries, online and video calls, reading the news, watching online videos and gaming are the most popular activities after social media. And internet users in developing countries are as likely, if not more, to use these services than in high-income countries. However, if we look further to the left, we see that the other services such as e-commerce, accessing health information and e-government are much less likely to be used in low middle-income countries than in high-income countries. We'll discuss some of the considerations for accelerating digital inclusion, and I'll hand over to Callum to talk through these.
Thank you, Calvin. As Calvin mentioned, as we wrap up, I'd just like to highlight a number of considerations that are relevant for accelerating digital inclusion around the world. While the increase in mobile internet adoption continues to bring the world closer to achieving the various targets set by the international community, for example, Sustainable Development Goal number 9 and the Broadband Commission's target to achieve worldwide broadband coverage, broadband internet penetration of 75% by 2025, the current trends need to be accelerated. Otherwise, by 2025, more than 40% of the population in low and middle income countries will remain offline. Significant challenges persist around unlocking the full potential of mobile-enabled internet. In particular, connectivity gaps disproportionately affect women and rural populations, thereby exacerbating existing inequalities. To ensure that the internet brings its benefits to everyone, focused efforts from mobile operators, handset manufacturers, internet companies, governments, and the international development community are required. To unlock the investment required to close the coverage gap and to deliver connectivity, there needs to be continued focus to reduce the cost of network deployment, lower the perceived investment risks, and increase the expected return on investment. We highlight in this slide here some recommendations. Closing the usage gap will also require strategies that are grounded in a detailed understanding of the local barriers to internet use, as well as the specific issues that women, rural users, and other underserved communities might face. Sustained efforts are required to increase awareness and understanding of mobile internet, as this is also an essential step on the user journey, as we highlighted at the outset of this webinar. Addressing barriers around affordability, relevance, lack of skills, and safety and security concerns will require coordinated action between all stakeholders. We also highlight in this slide some recommendations for closing the usage gap. Further details on all of these recommendations can be found in the report and also on the GSMA Connected Society website, where many of these areas are key aspects of our program. Finally, before we move to a demonstration of the Mobile Connectivity Index web tool and answer any of your questions, I'd just like to highlight how the Mobile Connectivity Index and the State of Mobile Internet Connectivity report are being used in the sector and beyond. First, these assets are becoming reference tools for many international organizations who are analyzing the state of ICT in international development. The Mobile Connectivity Index has been cited in the Broadband Commission's State of Broadband report, the World Bank's Moonshot for Connecting Africa Through Broadband report, and also in USAID's International Data and Economic Analysis database. UNESCO has also developed an Internet Universality Indicator framework for assessing Internet development. The team there lists 4 indices that have been key references for ICT in development, of which the Mobile Connectivity Index is one. The other 3 are from the ITU, World Economic Forum, and UNCTAD. Regulators and governments are also using the Mobile Connectivity Index to monitor and benchmark their progress. We've included an article here from Benin and another focusing on progress in Mauritius, and we've also seen the index being used by researchers and the media to track connectivity trends. I'll now hand back to Calvin to provide a short demonstration of the GSMA Mobile Connectivity Index to show how you can use it to assess the barriers to mobile internet adoption across 165 countries covered by the index. And this again covers 5 years of data from 2014 to 2018. We'll then come back and go through any of your questions.
Right, thank you, Callum. So we'll spend a little bit of time now just giving you a demonstration of the Mobile Connectivity Index. So hopefully on your screen you will see, or you will shortly see, the homepage of the Mobile Connectivity Index website. So the homepage shows a heat map of the countries that are included in the Mobile Connectivity Index. And you can see that if you hover over a country, you'll see the country, its overall index score, and its cluster as well. The cluster analysis and categories are something we go into a little bit more detail in the report itself. As I mentioned on the methodology before, the index is constructed using 38 indicators. In order to achieve consistency and comparability, all of those indicators are normalized and converted into 0 to 100 scores. All of the data you'll see on this website represent those normalized 0 to 100 scores. And the way to interpret those is that a high score is better on each dimension or indicator or enabler. So a higher score for coverage means that network coverage is greater. A higher score for affordability means that mobile services are cheaper as a proportion of income. In terms of the different parts of the website, I'll first just talk through some of the introductory information. So there's a tab on the top left about the index. Here, if you click on that, you can find an intro to the index and also where you can access further information, including contact details for Connected Society. Within here, there's also a tab outlining the methodology and data sources. So I mentioned before that the website includes a methodology document where you can see in more detail how the index has been constructed. In this part of the website as well, we also list all of our data sources and provide links to their websites and where relevant data. So the main provider of data that we use is GSMA Intelligence, but we also work with a number of third-party providers such as Ookla, Terrifica, and AppFigures. In here you can access their websites and data as well. There's also a tab on the top left as well where you can read the report and some of the associated assets. So I'll leave that with you to explore. In terms of the website itself, I won't go through every single bit of it, but there are a couple of things, interactive tools and functionality that may be of particular interest. So we can do a deep dive on one particular country. So as an example, I'm going to click on China. And here the first thing you see is the high-level index score for China and the enabler scores as well. Below that, on the left, you'll be able to scroll down and see some key metrics around coverage, mobile and mobile broadband adoption, and also income and population. Once you're at this point, you can also view the country analysis. So if I click on that, you can see China's overall index score and also the scores for the underlying enablers, dimensions, and indicators. So in China's case, it scores 74 on the index, which is one of the highest scores. And the score is pretty well balanced across enablers. So it scores quite well on all of them. In the case of content and services, it scores particularly highly, and it scores slightly less on affordability. In this part of the website, you would be able to explore some of these scores in more detail. So for example, China on infrastructure scores 73.9. If you were to look at the network coverage score, you would see that is very high. And we can look into that in more detail and find that in China, 2G, 3G, and 4G coverage are all very high. So this is unlikely to be a significant barrier to mobile internet adoption for most of the population. If we look below that, we see that also in infrastructure, we have a dimension and some indicators looking at network performance. So this includes variables such as download speeds, upload speeds, and latencies. And on here, this is where we find China again scoring quite well, but not a lower score than network coverage. So that's an area where, for example, the country could improve its overall index score. And we can see similar data for the other enablers and also dimensions and indicators. In this part of the website, we can also do some comparison analysis. So up here, you can click on country comparison. And here you can see China's score evolving over time, where it's increased from in 2014 from around 62 to its current score of 74. If we click on the geography comparison, we can compare China to another country. So we have regional averages, or we can compare it to a particular another market. So I'm going to compare it to India in this instance. I can include more countries as well. And here we can see that both countries are including, but in terms of overall level, China is scoring higher than India. We can look beyond the index though and dig into a bit more detail into some of the underlying indicators and enablers in the index. So we can do that by clicking on here. So instead of looking at the overall index, I could look at, for example, network quality, which we were discussing before. And here I can see that China is performing better than this on India, and we can actually see that this is a particular area where China's improved quite significantly over the last 5 years, which is one of the main drivers of its improvement in the score. India is also improving, but not quite to the same extent. On the other hand, if we were to move away from network performance, but look at some of our indicators on affordability, so here I'm going to look at the affordability of 1 gigabyte of data. Here we see a slightly different picture where India and China actually in 2018 are at a similar level, and actually in 2017 India was scored slightly higher in China. Those of you who have some familiarity of the Indian market might not be too surprised by this, where in the last few years mobile operators in India have been reducing their prices to amongst some of the most affordable worldwide. So even when looking at it as a proportion of income, it's an area where India scores very highly. We could also switch that and look at the cost of the device. And again, there we find that the score's overall lower, but we find that India again has improved significantly in the last 3 years. The graph here shows data for the last 5 years, so you can see a trend. You can, if you wish, also just look at one particular year, for example in 2018, and just do a side-by-side comparison. So that's the part of the website that allows you to explore the data and compare countries. Another part is the part of the website where you can actually view some of the data. So here on the top right, you can click on the screen there. And you can see that for the index score in any given year, I've got 2018 there, but I could, if I want to, switch to 2016. And here you can see the overall index scores for each country. I can then click on the enablers, dimensions, or indicators, and if I do that, then I'll be able to see the scores for all of those as well. For those of you who want to use the data and do more detailed and granular analysis, obviously viewing this data may not be as helpful if you actually want to do some analysis. So there is an option to download all of the index data on this tab here. So I can quickly open that. And you can see that the file has a README tab, a description of the data, and of most interest, it has all of the index scores for all 165 countries in all 5 years that the index covers. And we have the index score, the enabler scores, all of the dimension scores, and then all of the indicators as well. And then this can be accessed and used by you as and when you need it. Those were the key parts of the website that I wanted to talk through. I think the last one I'll just highlight is, as you can see, the homepage provides a heat map to illustrate the different index scores worldwide. This presents the overall index. On the data maps, you can select specific enablers, dimensions, and indicators. So just to provide an illustration, if I were to look at the network coverage dimension, you could see that the high scoring countries are those in dark green, and then lighter colors are those who score less well. So in the case of network coverage, much of the world that has actually achieved high levels of coverage, and those that have most room for improvement here are those in Sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia. By contrast, if I were to just go down and look at network performance and network quality, here we see a different picture where we see some East Asian markets, such as China and South Korea and also Australia, score very highly on this. Scandinavian countries score well too. For much of the rest of the countries in the world, there's still quite a bit of improvements they can make on network quality. And this isn't just in Sub-Saharan Africa, it also includes Latin America, Middle East, and Europe as well. Okay, I think that concludes the key aspects of the mobile connectivity index that I was going to demo. So we will now be taking questions and as part of the Q&A session if you have any. So please feel free to use the Q&A to ask any questions you have. Okay. So there was just a question on whether we can just quick highlight an example of a developing country, and it's some examples given in Sub-Saharan Africa. So absolutely we can do that. So here, if I just go back to the homepage of the index, I can, for example, click on Kenya, which scores 51. So that's one of the better performers in Sub-Saharan Africa. So you can see there that it scores quite well on consumer readiness, metrics around skills and gender equality, and some areas such as affordability where there's still room for improvement. If I were to do a deep dive on here on Kenya, you'd be able to see some of the underlying scores. So for example, in the case of Kenya, affordability is an area which is the lowest scoring area where there's room for improvement. And if you look in more detail, you'll find that the cost of devices in Kenya, so the handset price score, is particularly lower than the other aspects. So that can help identify some of the stronger barriers. I could then do a country comparison here, and for example, on the index, I can, for example, compare Kenya to some of its East African neighbors. So I could click on Uganda and also Tanzania. And there I can see that overall Kenya is the highest scoring country out of those three. Tanzania is a country that has improved quite a lot over the last 5 years. So it was the lowest scoring country out of these three in 2014, but it's improved in recent. So that's just an example of what you can do, another example of what you can do on the index. And in your own time, you can do this for any countries that you're interested in.
Hi everyone, this is Callum. Thank you all again for your questions, and please do keep posting them in the chat box. We'll go through them bit by bit. There's one question here about handset affordability. So the cheaper the handset as a proportion of income, then the higher a country will score on the index, because we see that as a key enabler of the provision of connectivity. We also have a question from a fellow epidemiologist, which is great. We're just currently digging out a bit of data on that to support to answer the question, so Calvin will respond on that shortly. And do please keep posting your questions.
So we had another very interesting question from someone based in Guatemala who wanted to understand a little bit more around the safety and security barriers that we highlighted in the presentation. So actually, Guatemala was one of the countries included in our consumer survey, so I can provide a little bit more information on that. Within the consumer survey, when we were asking the barriers that were stopping people from using mobile internet, we asked which one they perceived as the most important. We had a number of categories that we grouped, and within safety and security, there were 3 in particular. So the first one was whether users were concerned that they would receive unwanted contact from people online, for example, scam emails and unwanted messages on social media. The second category was that whether individuals or respondents were concerned that they might expose themselves or their family and children to harmful content. And the third one was around concerns about identity and other private information being stolen or misused. So these 3 combined led to were the underlying data behind the chart we showed, looking at the barriers to mobile internet adoption. In Guatemala, we find that all these 3 are quite significant. It's actually the last 2 that are reported as most significant barriers. So concerns about exposing themselves or their family to harmful content was by far the most important barrier that was reported by more people. More people reported that one than any other. And the following most important barrier was concerns about the identity or other private information being stolen or misused. So those were some of the key data points in our survey behind Guatemala. Cool. So thank you for those of you who are posting questions. Do keep doing that. We've got a few now which I can answer. So one person asked around the availability of data for North Korea, which is a very valid question. So currently, as you'll see on the index, North Korea currently isn't included in the mobile connectivity index. The reason for that is a lack of accessible data. So as I mentioned, the connectivity index consists of 38 individual indicators. We don't need data on every single one of those for countries, because there are a number of statistical steps you can take to impute missing data. But obviously, it's not ideal to be missing data on a large proportion of those indicators. And the issue we have in North Korea is that we don't have data on enough indicators. So if this is a priority market for any of you, or if you have information that you think you could share, please do get in touch with us, and we would be happy to see if we can include it in next year's index. When we first launched this index, in 2016, we had 134 countries in the index, and we now have 165. So where possible, we do try and increase the number where we can get relevant data. I think that question primarily pertains to North Korea, but the same applies to any other countries that we currently don't include in the index. If we can get better information, then absolutely we would be keen to include them in next year's index.
Hi everyone, Callum here. So we've had one question about the inclusion of digital skills. So we do cover digital skills in the connectivity index and also in the State of Mobile Internet Connectivity Report. Just to flag that this is also a growing area of interest for the Connected Society programme. So we're very keen to hear from others working on digital skills initiatives around the world, both in high income and low and middle income countries. We have our contact details on the website, so please do get in touch if you're working on any of these areas or you have, for example, globally relevant data on skills.
Okay, we have another question here that asks, when looking at affordability relative to income, how do we allow for the many markets where income is not formally recorded, and is there a weighting applied? Which is a valid question. So when we express the affordability of prices as a proportion of income, we use GDP per capita as a proxy for that, because as the question rightly identifies, average income at the household level isn't readily available, and there's not enough data available that we could include it in the index. So similar to other international bodies, we use GDP per capita. Because for the data that we do have income data, we find that GDP per capita has a very high correlation with income. It's a pretty good proxy to use for the purposes of building this index. In addition to that, in terms of differences within countries, obviously average incomes can hide significant variations in income inequality. So for this reason, that's why in the affordability enabler, we also have an indicator that measures inequality that captures this as well. So for example, there are a number of markets that have high levels of income inequality, and these will be reflected in the affordability scores.
Hi everyone. So I think that's all we have time for today. Just to flag that we have the link to the report on the screen there on our website. There's also a number of blogs that we've been doing over the past couple of months related to particular areas of the Mobile Connectivity Index, including particular regions, particular priorities like digital inclusion. So please also check those out on the website. We'll be sending a link to the report with a follow-up email off the back of this webinar, which will also include a recording. And again, please also do keep in touch. You can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and if you are working on any digital skills or other programs relevant to Connected Society, there's a contact email address on our website. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at future Connected Society webinars.